This video shows how I converted my Firman WHO3242 Dual Fuel generator to also run on natural gas, but making any modifications voids the warranty. Also, gasoline, natural gas, and propane are all flammable and even explosive, so an improper modification could lead to property damage, serious injury, or even death. So I do not recommend that anybody do this. Leave this up to the trained professionals. I was able to get my Firman WHO3242 Dual Fuel gasoline and propane generator to essentially be a tri-fuel generator that can also run on natural gas for about $150 in parts if you include the $33 15-foot quick connect hose. However, because natural gas has far less energy density than propane, if I run the generator on natural gas, I'll only feel good about running it at about 80% of its 3,000 watt propane rating, which is about 2,400 watts, 2,430 watts. If you look at the wattage for Firman's tri-fuel generators, you'll see that the running wattage ratings for natural gas are about 81% of those for propane, but it ranges from about 75% to 93% depending on the model. An important thing to note is that there's an electrical switch on the backside of the propane gas selector switch, which lets the generator's computer know which fuel is being used, as you can see here. When running on propane, if the wattage load exceeds 3,000 watts for 30 seconds, the computer shuts off the inverter but leaves the engine running. The inverter shut-off wattage limit for gasoline is higher. I assume that the computer does this in order to protect the engine from excessive wear that would be caused by running the motor bogged down. But when running on natural gas, the generator's computer thinks it's running on propane, so the computer does not protect the engine from bogging down or stalling by switching off the electricity generating inverter when the load exceeds 2,400 watts. So for the sake of the engine's longevity, I'll be careful to keep my wattage load below about 2,400 watts when running on natural gas. A little background on my situation. On March 14, 2023, the winds in Northern California howled like I'd never seen before, 50 to 90 miles per hour, and lots of trees toppled, bringing down lots of power lines. Consequently, we had a multi-day power outage that affected about 200,000 people. The power outage not only impacted our neighborhoods, homes, and businesses, it impacted the nearby cell towers, so we couldn't get cellular service at our house. Fortunately, the weather was warm, so we didn't need to run our natural gas furnace, which requires electricity to run the fan. And throughout the power outage, our natural gas service worked, so we could cook on the gas stovetop and our gas grill. We also have a 40-gallon gas water heater that doesn't require electricity, unlike tankless gas water heaters. However, I was worried that hundreds of dollars of food in my refrigerator and freezer would go bad, especially the freezer, which was packed full of meat. So I called a friend who lives about 5 miles away, where they didn't have a power outage, to see if he had any space in his freezer. He said no, but I have a gas generator that you can borrow. Now that's a friend. So I borrowed his Honda EU 2200i 1800 watt gasoline powered generator. It saved my food. It allowed us to charge and run our phones and laptop PCs. It restored our fiber optic internet service, which also allowed us to have cellular service via Wi-Fi calling. Our fiber optic internet line comes from telephone poles to the north, but our power outage came from telephone poles to the south. So once I restored power to the fiber optic gateway, we were able to get internet service. Even though I live in earthquake-prone, wildfire-prone, rolling, blackout-prone California, about a mile from the San Andreas Fault, I never bought a generator because I mistakenly thought that they were big, like the open-frame models that I had seen, and so I didn't want to store one in my relatively small house. I was surprised at how small my friend's Honda EU 2200 generator is, and so I decided to buy a compact generator. However, because I rarely need a generator, maybe once every few years, I was worried that if I ran a generator on gasoline, the gasoline would go bad and the carburetor would gum up, even if I meticulously serviced it after each use. So I wanted a generator that would also run on propane and natural gas, but especially natural gas. I'd converted my propane grill to natural gas several years ago, but I still keep about 4 20-pound propane tanks so that I can use them on my gas grill if there's ever an earthquake and the gas company shuts off the natural gas to prevent fires, which they sometimes do in big earthquakes. In a big earthquake, if the power goes out, it can be difficult to get gasoline or propane if the gas stations or propane stations don't have electricity to run their pumps and their credit card readers and their cash registers. My neighborhood gas stations were all closed during the last power outage. And propane will likely be in high demand and may sell out, so it's also nice to have the option to run on gasoline. I always keep a few gallons for my lawnmower, and I can siphon gasoline from my cars if needed, but running the generator on gasoline would be my last resort. Running on natural gas would be my first choice because it's clean, cheap, and it's piped right to my house, so I could run for weeks without having to fill up gasoline tanks or propane tanks. Running on relatively expensive propane would be my second choice, and hopefully I'll never need to run the generator on gasoline. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any compact tri-fuel generators. All the tri-fuel generators seem to be fairly big, which would be difficult for me to store. Fortunately, shortly after the windstorm, Costco happened to have the Firman WHO3242 Dual Fuel propane gasoline generator on sale for $200 off for a total of $600. It has a 193 cc engine, which is probably about 6 horsepower. It was highly rated in user reviews, and based on my internet research, I figured I could probably get it to run on natural gas without having to add a snorkel to the carburetor and without irreversibly modifying the generator. I wanted my modifications to be completely reversible so that I could undo the modifications to get warranty service or take it back to Costco. This is really important to the conversion method that I chose, so if you watch this video and you're wondering why I didn't just cut the built-in propane line or drill a hole for a natural gas quick connect or something, that's probably why. I bought a Parts End brand Garrett's Nimco style low pressure regulator for the natural gas supply line because carburetors aren't leak-proof valves. If I were to supply natural gas to the generator without using a low pressure regulator, then the gas would leak out of the carburetor when the engine is not running. The low pressure regulator allows gas to flow only if there's a vacuum from the engine sucking the natural gas in from the regulator. There are many makers of Garrett's Nimco style low pressure regulators. I chose the Parts End model because it was the cheapest, well-rated one that I could find, and it came with some other connectors that I needed. It's worth noting that same carburetor leakage issue is true for propane, which is why Firman added a normally closed 12-volt solenoid valve on the input of their propane regulator. When the generator's battery switch is activated and the solenoid's electrical plug is connected, the solenoid valve opens and allows propane to flow to the regulator. If not for this solenoid valve, then when the engine is off, propane would flow from the regulator and leak from the carburetor if the propane tank's valve were left open. Speaking of which, just for an experiment, I attached my own non-Firman propane regulator to a propane tank and connected it with a 1/4-inch quick connect on the generator. It ran fine, but with the risk of leaking propane from the carburetor if the engine is off and the propane tank's valve is open. Initially, I tried running natural gas into the generator's 1/4-inch propane quick connect, and it worked, but because natural gas has a lower energy density than propane, the relatively narrow 1/4-inch diameter quick connector restricts the gas flow too much. Consequently, the engine bogged down when the engine load got to about 1950 watts. It ran pretty nicely up to 1800 watts. As a side note, the first 1/4-inch male propane quick connect that I bought at Ace Hardware wouldn't mate with the generator. I think it was a non-standard, but then I bought a male quick connect from Amazon, which had a wider hole and a thinner rim. It mated perfectly with the generator. You can see them side by side in this photo. I debated simply using the propane quick connect and ran the generator below 1800 watts, but I really wanted to have 2400 watts available. I was hoping that I could replace the generator's 1/4-inch female quick connector with a 3/8-inch female quick connect that I could use for either propane or natural gas. I removed the 1/4-inch quick connect and sized it up, but I could not find a 3/8-inch quick connector that had an externally threaded end that could be mounted to the generator's internal bracket, nor could I find one that would fit into the generator's control panel hole. So I decided to tee in a 3/8-inch natural gas line and boost the performance to 2400 watts. Here's how I did it.
So here's what I did to convert this thing to natural gas. First, I removed the 4 Phillips head screws from the lid. And then I unscrewed the gas cap, and there's another Phillips head screw here that I removed so I could untether this gas cap. And I put the screw back in. And from there, I just pried this up. This kind of snaps off. Lid snaps off. Set that aside. And then I removed the 4 posi-drive screws from the gas tank. You probably use a Phillips head. I could have used a Phillips head, I guess, but I end up using a posi-drive bit, which fits better and makes it nice. Did that with a driver drill. And I'll prop this up and show you what's inside. So after I removed the posi-drive screws, I was able to finagle the gas tank up a little bit. Didn't disconnect it. Still connected here to the fuel line, and got to be a little bit careful about that. So I was careful not to damage that or damage any of the lines going in and out of the fuel tank, the gas tank. And then I've got a light on this right now so you can see, but I put a little 1x1 stick underneath it to hold it up while I worked on it. And then inside, I just right there is the back of the propane quick connect. It's got a barb connector on it, 3/8 inch, I guess, and it was connected to its fuel line, which runs over to the carburetor. So I just removed the hose clamp, pulled this off of the barb, added a 1 3/4 inch piece of 3/8 inch fuel line, put on hose clamp. I have a T, which looks like that. It's actually a Y, I guess. And added that hose clamp into the Y. That goes out. That was the original propane line. And then I added this 3/8 inch fuel line to run out to the natural gas input. I've got on this line, I've got a 3/8 inch barb with a hose clamp, and that runs into a 3/8 inch male MIP, and then that runs into a 3/8 inch female quick connect. All right. So put the 4 posi drive screws back in, finagled the gas tank back in, made sure to get this little line here into its holder, and yeah, the nice thing about this is I can just store the 3/8 inch natural gas fuel line right inside and still got the lid on. So I'll probably never put the screws back on for the lid. So here's the 4 screws that I have from the lid. I put those in a little plastic bag, and I'm just gonna store those in there. Hopefully I'll never have to use gasoline on this thing. And just take the tether and put it back in here as well. And then I can just take this lid and put it back in here, snap it back on, and put the gas lid back on. There you go. So that stores up pretty nice, compact, And so does this. This is fairly compact as well. This is the low pressure gas regulator and hose. So that's fairly small as well. I gotta make sure that I pull these out when I use it. Those little air inlets. And put those plugs back in. Another one on the other side there. There it is. So, and cover this up to make sure bugs don't get into it. So that's it. It's all a pretty compact little setup. Should be easy to store. I can make room for that. So the reason I went with the 3/8 inch female quick connect for the supply line for natural gas is that the female quick connects act as a valve, and they shut off any gas flow when they're not connected. So since this is teed into the propane female quick connect, that means if I connect natural gas, the natural gas won't come out the propane side, and if I connect to propane, propane won't come out the natural gas female quick connect. So from there, I did a male 3/8 inch quick connect, which had a female input on it. Did a 3/8 inch male to 3/8 inch barb with a hose clamp. I have a 2-inch section of 3/8 inch fuel line that goes onto the 3/8 inch barb that came with the hose block power valve. And the input of that hose block power valve was 3/8 inch MIP, which fits into the 3/8 inch FIP on the low pressure regulator. That thing had a 3/4 inch female input, and I bought an adapter that goes 3/4 inch male MIP to 3/8 inch male flare, and then I bought a hose that has a 3/8 inch female flare fitting on it, and then 15 feet of line that ends up going to a male quick connect, which then plugs into the 3/8 inch female quick connect that's on the side of my house where my gas grill is. It's worth noting that on these low pressure regulators, there are 2 plugs where these red plugs are, and those need to be removed when you're operating the low pressure regulator. They're air inlets, allows the pressure to regulate, and but I'm going to put those back in when I'm storing it so that bugs don't get in there and build cocoons or something. These things these low pressure regulators, in order to work properly, have to sit upright like that, and otherwise they won't work right. So they do actually put these little mounting holes over here so that you can mount them to something to hold it upright. Mine sets upright on its own pretty well, so I may implement a bracket later to hold it upright, but for right now I'm okay. And another thing to note about these low pressure regulators is that they have a little priming button here, and especially when you got 15 feet of hose, and if you have it in storage, it fills up with air. And so the first time you connect it, or when you connect it, you need to sort of prime the line and get some natural gas into the line so that it can get over to your generator. So it helps to push this for a couple seconds and let the gas flow into the low pressure regulator. Similarly, you may want to choke it just for a second to let the gas flow from the low pressure regulator into the generator, but really doesn't need to be choked to warm up or anything. So really want to just push that choke back in again, maybe open it up just to let the natural gas in, and then push it back in and hit the start button, and it should start right up. Mine does.
I didn't know if a 3/8 inch supply line to the low pressure regulator would be fat enough, so for testing I initially tried connecting the regulator directly to a 3/4 inch gas line. Then I tried connecting it to my gas grill's 5-foot long 3/8" flare gas line, and later to a 15-foot long 3/8" quick connect gas line, but none of that made any difference in the generator's performance. A 3/8" diameter supply line is wide enough. However, if a 3/8" supply line were too long, it would likely impede the gas flow and degrade the engine's performance. I'm not sure how long it can be without affecting the performance. Similarly, for testing, initially I used about 4 feet of 1/2-inch hose from the regulator to the generator. Later I used about 5 foot of 3/8" fuel hose. There was no performance difference. 3/8" fuel hose is wide enough. However, if a 3/8" hose were too long, it would likely impede the gas flow and degrade the engine's performance. Based on my research, I added a hose load block power valve, which had a 3/8" barb to 3/8" male MPT to the output of the low pressure regulator in order to regulate the maximum fuel flow from the regulator to the carburetor. If the carburetor is essentially force-fed too much fuel, the engine runs poorly because it runs too rich. This is especially noticeable when the generator is idling. Before adjusting the hose load block power valve, I could hear a periodic pop, pop sound when idling. I think that was from it running too fuel rich, which I think can cause the engine to build up carbon deposits. So I opened the valve to be fully open, ran the generator at full load, 2650 watts. Then I decreased the valve's fuel flow until the engine sounded like it started to bog down. At that point, I unscrewed the valve's adjustment bowl about a half turn, and I locked that adjustment into place with the brass nut. That enabled it to run nicely at full load and at idle. Here's what I did.
Okay, so running off of a 3/8" quick connect, 15-foot line into my low pressure regulator, another 3/8" quick connected 3/8" fuel line, and I've got this thing running right now at 2600 watts between the hair dryers, heat gun, and the light bulb. Alright. And it's running at 119 volts, not too bad, but that's really pushing it. I would not run it this high. This is just to set this power block and then screw this in until it starts to bog down. Bogging down right there, so I'm going to back off just a little bit, and then I'll lock down this brass nut later on with a wrench. There you go. Running 2600 watts right now, which is probably more than I should. Actually, it's 2650.
It may be worth noting that I couldn't add large wattage loads to an already loaded generator. For example, I was able to start by adding a 1325 watt heat gun on high, followed by a 680 watt hair dryer on low, followed by a 345 watt hair dryer on low, followed by 3 100 watt light bulbs for a total of 2650 watts, and it ran nicely. But if I started with that same 1325 watt heat gun on high and then added a 1275 watt hair dryer on high for a total of just 2600 watts, the engine would bog down and stall out. I suspect that's because the generator's computer is not programmed to deal with natural gas, but even the user manual says that wattage loads should not be added in large increments. Fortunately, I got the generator to work on natural gas. It starts right up and it runs nicely. Below this video, I'll put a list of the parts that I used. Fortunately, some of the connectors that I needed were, for some reason, included with the parts end regulator and with the 15-foot quick connect hose that I bought. I also bought an exhaust extension for the generator so that I can run the generator locked inside of my garage and without disturbing my neighbors with generator noise. Attaching the exhaust extension is pretty straightforward. I was able to remove the 2 Phillips head screws with a magnetic screwdriver and with a magnet on the plate so that I didn't drop it. Then I added the exhaust extension using the same screws.
My house has wire mesh vents in the crawl space and in the garage, so I decided to take advantage of one of the ones in the garage by drilling a hole in the exterior wall into the garage so I can run a 3/8" natural gas quick connect line as needed. Otherwise I'll plug up that hole when not in use. And this lets me run the generator locked inside the garage so it won't get stolen, and that also keeps the noise down for my neighbors, and it does a good job of keeping the noise down inside the house. I added an exhaust extension, and I cut a piece of hardy backer board just big enough to cover the vent, drilled a hole in it, and that forces the exhaust air outside, and the hardy backer board keeps the heat of the exhaust pipe from touching the wood and possibly causing a fire. So that's my solution.
Please hit the like button if you find this video useful. I spent so much time researching and experimenting to get my generator to run on natural gas that I thought I'd make a video in hopes that it would save others from wasting hours of their time. If you're going to buy any of the products in this video, please do so from the links below. It won't cost you any more, but I might get a small reward. If you have any questions, leave a comment and I'll try to answer.